All right, so thanks everyone for spending your evening with me. Today, I'm going to be talking about measuring what matters and why that matters. I'm going to be introducing some of the kinds of things that software teams might need to consider measuring, and I'm going to introduce the nuanced relationships between some of those different kinds of metrics. Then I'm going to introduce a tool called the Value Delivery Metrics Loop that my colleagues and I created to help us ideate, rationalize, and prioritize what to measure as software teams to ensure that we're continuously delivering value with our software initiatives. So this is not going to be a talk about what specific metrics are or frameworks like the Pirate metrics, how to measure things. But of course, I'm very happy to talk at length about that with pretty much anyone who buys me a beer. There are some prerequisites. I think it will be beneficial if you already have some familiarity with the software delivery processes and teams and roles, and also some familiarity with the kinds of things that software delivery teams might measure. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom, and I'll see them on the side, and hopefully there'll be some time at the end for me to answer. So the talk should last about 40 to 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. So before we get started, assuming that you're all software delivery practitioners, just spend a minute to think about what are some of the things that you are measuring today? What are some of the things that tell you whether your software is delivering value or that your teams are being productive? And also think about what is the most important thing out of all of those things? And why are we measuring that as the most important thing? So have that in your mind, and maybe we'll come back to it at the end. Okay, so firstly, we have to recognize that software is an investment. It's a tool, it's a means to an end, and it's very expensive. And it's investment by a business or an organization that is investing in or patronizing the software and presumably has some goals that it hopes the software can achieve. Now, it's not necessarily a profit-making enterprise. You can have software organizations that are non-profit or internal, but it is an organization that is investing in a business model. So, for example, Grab's business is not a mobile super app. That's just the channel or the platform for generating cash flow by selling convenience in the form of ride-hailing, food delivery, payments, products like that. Similarly, GovTech's business is not apps like Form.sg. It's generating cost savings and efficiency and trust in public services. So just bear in mind that someone is always paying for the software. Even if you work in an established organization with an IT department with a budget for building software, there's likely a panel of people who are making decisions about the investment they're making and the potential returns they'll get, just like a venture capital investors reviewing startups. So what are they investing in? What we're actually paying for is people's time and the tools and technology that those people need in order to deliver effective software. So those could be things like platform hosting fees, service subscriptions, but people are really the biggest cost right now, at least. And just like any investors, they need information, they need data, they need to weigh costs against benefits, and they need to be able to track progress. So they need maybe leading indicators as well as lagging indicators, because the data will enable better decision making. So when I say metrics, just to throw out a definition, metrics are specific pieces of data that are gathered for a specific goal. So we can all agree that measuring things is important, and we have to have those goals in mind when we're delivering the software. So why don't we? A lot of teams get the requirements, they build the software, they test it, deploy it, and then they simply assume that value has been delivered. We did what was asked, we delivered the outputs. And in a lot of cases, this might actually be fair. The software might be delivering value, but how can we really know? And how can we really know that our teams are optimally productive? Maybe the process to deliver the software was so exhausting that we just want to take a breather and move on to the next thing. And some folks might be measuring some things, but maybe not consistently, maybe not keeping those metrics in focus when making decisions. So I've seen this a lot when working with a really diverse range of organizations and software teams. How do we know if our teams are being productive? How do we know if the software is really delivering business value? And maybe we have tools like Google Analytics. There's KPI dashboards in Jira. There's application monitoring tools like Dynatrace and Splunk that track the speed and downtime and errors and stuff like that. But a lot of software delivery organizations don't focus on the things that really matter, the things that prove that their software is consistently delivering those returns, and that the resources, the people and tools that the organization is investing in are capable of sustaining that value delivery. And finally, we might be measuring something now, but as our product or team changes, we don't adjust or do anything differently when it comes to metrics and tracking. So I've also seen a lot of teams not measure anything until some software is released, or perhaps only just take one measurement for sanity once the feature or the product is live, and then stop tracking or not track on a consistent basis. So of course, the right time to measure things is always, but those things that we measure might change over time as well. So it really matters that we measure the right things at the right time. And trying to move a specific metric is an easier and more tangible idea for different people to understand compared to a more abstract outcome that you're driving. So having clear metrics can really help with alignment as well. So for example, if I tell you that we're trying to hit a 5% revenue increase, it's perhaps a more tangible target than asking everyone to deliver better customer experiences. I mentioned it helps us to make decisions as well. Um, it reveals reality. Those numbers reveal clearly whether you should course correct or double down on something. The metrics also help us to explain to others where you're at, when you've done a good thing. And those cold, hard numbers can be really impactful when telling stories. Metrics can also tell you when you're done and when you can move on to the next priority. And finally, they're great talking points for your next big idea, pitch, promotion, or job opportunity. So it's important that we're measuring the right things in the right way, at the right time. I haven't done an introduction yet, so maybe I'll start that off first. My name's Daryl. I'm currently a delivery lead at Tanzu Labs, but in my long career, I've covered just about every role there is in software delivery. And I think that gives me quite a diverse set of perspectives, especially when talking about these kinds of things. I've also spent many years as a consultant. So I've worked with many, many teams on all kinds of software products in just about every industry. And that also, I think, gives me a wide gamut of experience in seeing the ways that teams do or do not measure value delivery. Not just in consulting, I've also worked with a large established organization. So I can empathize with the difficulty in trying to implement different kinds of measurements and experimenting and influencing such teams. Um, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll share my link at the end, and I'm happy to talk more about my experiences and adventures. So now let's get back to it. Let's think about what we should be measuring. So this diagram or this workflow is adapted from Josh Zaden's diagram in his book, Outcomes Over Output. We start with the resources that the organization is investing in, the people and the tools. They are undertaking activities like designing, coding, testing, planning meetings, all of that work, and then they're producing features or outputs. But outputs are not measures of success. Just because we delivered all the features in the plan, it doesn't mean that our product will meet user needs or deliver business value. Another analogy that I like to use is a bike ride. So I was in Bali recently and I rented a scooter to be able to explore these beautiful waterfalls in the central parts of the island, which are often in obscure locations off the beaten path and with no signposts. And I don't know the roads very well there. I don't live there. But I did have some tools that can help me measure progress towards my desired outcome, which was to arrive safely and quickly at my destination. So if you think about that analogy, the resources are the scooter, the fuel, and the driver, me. The activity is the act of me driving that scooter, and the outputs are maybe the kilometers traveled. So sure, I can travel many kilometers and I can measure things like my direction, my speed, my remaining fuel. Those might be good indicators of whether I'll likely be able to reach my destination anytime soon. But how will I know if I'm getting closer or if I'm even there yet? So the desired outcome, that's the impact of me driving in the hot sun for ages and getting terribly sunburnt, is arriving at the intended destination quickly and safely. So what I actually need to measure is my current location at regular intervals, and then I verify when I think I've arrived. So what I should be checking is my GPS location on a map. That's the right thing to measure, and I should be doing that at regular intervals. But that's not to say I should ignore those key performance indicators like speed and fuel too. So those are the outcomes, the impact of our work. So now bringing it back to software, outcomes are the ways that our software impacts the organization that it's investing in it. So it could be things like more revenue or reduced costs. So let's call these business outcomes, the ways that our software benefits our organization. So here's some examples. Put simply, if we focus on the business outcomes that we want and the business value drivers, so the things that the organization cares about, what our stakeholders and investors are trying to achieve, then we can more easily determine the right metrics that we need to positively impact through our software initiatives. So, for example, the business cares about revenue, and what they're measuring might be quarterly sales income that tells them whether they're likely increasing or achieving sufficient revenue. If the business cares about cost savings, similarly, they might be measuring quarterly operating costs or margins. And if they care about brand image, they might be measuring some sort of brand awareness score or something like that. So now we know what the business might be measuring, what our stakeholders and investors might be gathering data on. But the problem with these business outcomes is that the measures of success present a number of challenges for teams building software. There might be a very long feedback cycle. So, for example, in that previous slide, quarterly revenue, that's obviously only published on a quarterly basis. So it's difficult for us to use that to gauge our impact and use that metric to make decisions as we continue to work every week delivering the software. Also, the data might not be available to us, especially in public companies. It's likely that revenue numbers might be restricted. And there might be things that impact those business metrics beyond just our own software initiatives. Sticking with that revenue example, while our product could contribute to the revenue, so could other products. So could the season, the market, the economy, lots of things, right? So instead, teams delivering the software need to focus on outcomes that are within their control and that only they can influence. So let's call these product outcomes. How can we influence the behavior of the organization's customers, the product users, in such a way in the short term that we can positively impact the organization in the long term? And just to try to clarify, these product metrics always relate to user behavior, ways that users interact with our product. And hopefully that will help to clarify a mental model about what a product metric is and why that is within our influence. So for example, here, some product metrics that you might be familiar with, a cart conversion rate, that's clearly related to a user action of completing a purchase. But when a user completes a purchase, there might be other things that we can measure related to that action as well, like the user activation rate. It plays into retention as well. Um, if the user provides feedback, maybe they click on something at the end of a user journey to provide feedback. Maybe there's like a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The thing that we might be measuring then is some ratio of positive to negative feedback. And here's the important bit. It's the relationship between our product metrics and business metrics. So if we know what our product outcomes are, we can more easily identify product metrics, the things that we can measure in the product related to user actions that will tell us if we are likely to be delivering value for the business organization. So those product metrics are like leading indicators for business metrics. So those things like conversions, they can be a good indicator that tell us whether we are likely to impact quarterly revenue, which are lagging indicators. So that's us together with our stakeholders and investors as software delivery teams, we must be able to infer that moving this product metric is likely to impact the important business metric. So going back through those examples, if the business cares about revenue and it's measuring quarterly sales income, our cart conversion rate is a good indicator of whether we will move that business metric. If the business cares about cost savings and they're measuring quarterly operating costs, and they know that online transactions are cheaper than offline transactions, maybe they're measuring some kind of ratio or conversion to online transactions, then the thing that we can measure, one part of that equation is the transaction volumes inside the product. Finally, if the business cares about brand image and is measuring the brand awareness score, maybe we can measure something like referrals in our product. We can very clearly think that if referrals are increasing, we're seeing more users being referred to our product, we can infer that more people are likely to become aware of the brand, the business brand. In that middle example, it's worth just highlighting as well that sometimes there might be some intermediary or connective metrics that different levels of a business might need to consider as well. So now we know that there's a relationship between those two levels of abstraction at which we can measure the value of a software initiative. But now comes the real problem is what to measure, because there's many things that we could measure, but probably few that we should. We have to acknowledge that with each additional metric comes that additional overhead to gather and analyze the data. So we do need some process to ideate and prioritize key metrics at each level in order to be able to answer the question, is this software delivering value? But there's more to value delivery than just the outcomes. There are still the outputs and the processes and tools and activities to produce them that enable the delivery of those outcomes. So then there are metrics that relate to our processes and tools that will indicate our proficiency to deliver those product outcomes. So going back to my crazy bike ride in Bali example, the fuel gauge, the speedometer, the compass, they are useful indicators here. They will tell us whether I am likely to be able to achieve my objective and deliver that outcome. And again, there's an important and nuanced relationship here between these such metrics and the important product metrics. So going through these, if we care about cart conversion rate, maybe something that would be important to monitor in terms of our process and tools is our latency between some of our services. If we care about transaction volumes, we want to optimize and maximize the number of transactions, we might need to be monitoring error rates that are blocking some of those transactions that could have otherwise gone through. And obviously the reasons behind those errors as well. And if we're measuring positive versus negative feedback or user satisfaction or something like that, maybe we need to be thinking about measuring our lead time to production. So how long does it take to get from an idea to a feature in the hands of users? Because the shorter our lead time is, or the greater our agility, the easier it will be to optimize and experiment to try and improve that satisfaction score. And finally, there's one other set of things that we might need to think about measuring, and that's people. The organization, the business, is investing in people who are going to adopt those processes and tools to deliver the value. And the business expects those people to continue delivering value sustainably. So we can benefit from measuring the likelihood of those people to be able to keep doing that. And we have to recognize that this is it's a kind of weird thing to think about. But people leave organizations and they take knowledge and contacts with them. And that can really impact the workflow and the productivity of a team. Just like when people get sick, they have personal lives that impact their work. People have good days and bad days. Some people, like me, are not morning people. So maybe productivity changes throughout the day. People have different skills and experience, different approaches to their work, which can sometimes lead to friction when working with others, whereas sometimes teams just click. So here, the measurements, the metrics get a lot more qualitative. Um, it's also worth mentioning that I'm not talking about measuring individual performance. What we care about here is really a team of individuals working together effectively and productively. So it's things like team skills, retention, sustainability. Once again, we see there's an important relationship between these different kinds of metrics. So, for example, if we're measuring volatility in delivery velocity, we want to be delivering at a predictable pace, then it's going to be important to ensure that our teams feel like they are able to sustain that. Um, no matter what's going on in their lives or what features or how complex the features are that they're working on. And again, there are many ways we can try to measure our proficiency to leverage our resources to sustainably deliver value. But again, many things we could measure, probably few that we should. And with each metric comes additional overhead to gather and analyze data, especially when you're measuring things about teams and people and you're trying to find ways to create abstractions around those qualitative metrics. So again, there should be some sort of process to ideate and prioritize key metrics at each level in order to answer the other question, are we able to sustain value delivery? And that brings us to the value delivery metrics loop. So this is a tool that my colleagues and I came up with to help us ideate and prioritize and rationalize the right metrics. So looking at this diagram, it tells us a business invests in people who exploit and sustain processes and tools and technology that enable the delivery of product outcomes, which will positively impact the business. And again, here we use business to represent whatever it is, the organization that is investing in the software. So, in order to measure our proficiency to deliver value and return on investment, we should probably be measuring things in each of these four quadrants. And using this canvas helps us to maintain focus on the importance of being to rationalize what we measure because of the relationships between those different metrics. Here's an example. So let's start with the quadrant with the money that kickstarts the loop, the business, and then we'll work backwards. So in this example, you can see that the business is measuring success through quarterly revenue and brand reputation. So we can infer that a software product that delivers positive and increasing, say, booking conversions and high customer satisfaction is likely to positively impact those business metrics. You can draw a line between those stickies. We can also infer that if we are releasing to production regularly Therefore, we have a short and stable lead time with low volatility, low error rates, and fast response times. Then we're more likely to deliver increased conversion and satisfaction rates in the product. And lastly, a team that can achieve this must be productive, skilled, motivated, and able to work at a sustainable pace. So they could do something like a team health check, and that should reveal some metrics that could serve as reliable indicators for these criteria. So this would be a team that is worth the business to invest in. You can Google team health checks or the Spotify team health check to understand a bit more about that practice, if you like. Here's another example. So here we see the business is measuring cost savings. And at the product level, maybe the team are measuring things like time spent on the page, and people are measuring daily unique visitors in the product. They're measuring a user journey effort score. Maybe there's something that pops up at the end of the user journey. How easy was this on a scale of 1 to 5? And then in terms of process and technology, they're measuring uptime of the product. They're measuring the number of bugs fixed and the number of test cases executed. So have a think about this for a minute. Are these the right things? I mean, if we think about daily unique visitors and time spent per page, it's certainly interesting numbers that could be important to measure. But are they really the things that are telling us whether we're likely to be delivering cost savings? Admittedly, this is just a dummy example. So we don't have context on what this product is, so we can't really answer that question. But it gets you thinking. Maybe also there's things missing. So you can see there's nothing in the people quadrant. Maybe that's okay for this kind of team. If it's maybe a one-person product team, then maybe that's okay. Or maybe if it's two people that are always working in sync, very closely, collaborating effectively, maybe that's okay. Now, at the start, I highlighted that a lot of us may be measuring the right things, but not at the right times. So there's one piece missing from this tool so far, and that's time horizons. Now, if we think about it, the things that we're measuring might change over time. For example, if we're building out an MVP, the initial release for a new product with a very small team, it's likely we'll be measuring a lot fewer things than a large team working on a huge product portfolio. Maybe we're just measuring some kind of activation metric or user growth, something related to that. Maybe we're also measuring lead time because we want to be able to experiment and iterate quickly. And as team size increases and the product starts to mature, probably there are other things that could be impacted. And we want to decide what to measure and what to prioritize accordingly. And again, remember that the more we measure, the more overhead. So maybe as we're kind of delivering more of those core features, we've validated, we've got product market fit from our MVP. Maybe we want to start measuring things like completion rates, cycle times, error rates. And then as the team grows, we might want to start measuring some kind of team health abstraction score as well. And then later on, as we start to expand to more customers, more use cases, as the product really starts to grow, then we might want to think about metrics frameworks like the Pirate metrics. We might want to think about engagement scores, feature analytics, retention and satisfaction of the people as well. We might also want to start planning ahead for things that we might want to measure or start tracking later, because sometimes there can be a lead time to set things up or gather baseline metrics. Sometimes you need to purchase special tools or provision new analytics or application monitoring tools, things like that. That takes a bit of thinking ahead. It's worth adding one caveat that metrics don't necessarily have to change. Because typically optimizing a metric can take a long time. But you might want to plan ahead for adding new things. Another example is if you want to start measuring, say, a 6-month or annual retention window, which is quite long, you would need to start measuring some key activation metric now so that you will have that data available to you later, and you can keep an eye on that retention metric. So we've added in these time horizons as well. You can see here now, next, later. And we've deliberately made the nearer time horizons smaller to force more focus, and the later time horizons having more space to ideate. So next, I'm just going to share some real-world examples to demonstrate how the tool can be used for different kinds of products and teams. So I did a survey and I spoke to some product managers in different kinds of companies. And this example came from Blue Apron, which I don't think is available in Singapore in this region. But in the US, it's a meal kit delivery service that provides pre-portioned ingredients and recipes to subscribers, allowing them to cook healthy meals at home. So let's think about their business. They need to prepare those packaged meals. They need to have some inventory. They probably need to cater for a range of needs. They need some variety. So there's a lot of complicated things that they need to prepare for there. And the way that they make money is through subscriptions. So they need to build up a large enough base of subscribers within certain areas, perhaps, and they will need to ensure that those subscribers renew their subscriptions to maintain a sustainable business. So the first thing, the most important thing for them to start measuring first was the monthly recurring revenue. Are we making enough money to stay afloat? And we can see that monthly subscription volumes and conversion rates were the most important metrics within their app, within their product, in order to tell them whether they're likely to be increasing their monthly recurring revenue. Later on, they start looking at their gross merchandise volume as well, because that impacts their bottom line. And they're also starting to think about in the product, what is the average order value? How can we increase the amount of money that people are paying for each subscription through maybe add-on services or options? And then there are other metrics that they focused on later as well. In the process and tech side, you can see that release frequency was the most important thing initially. That's because they wanted to be able to experiment quickly in order to optimize those conversion rates and find ways to increase subscribers. Then further optimizations can be made there by monitoring things like the page load time, performance, and the turnaround time to fix bugs. So it's quite easy to rationalize how all of these metrics relate to each other. And they feel like the right things. They feel like important things for the team at Blue Apron to demonstrate that they are consistently and sustainably delivering value. Let's look at another example. So this is an early growth stage startup that opted to remain anonymous. It's a Series B climate tech startup. And how it works is essentially they have a team of human experts that gather information and data and collate that into email reports that can be sent to users. And the users subscribe to those email reports. So again, let's think about this business. Their main cost comes from those people, the humans that are putting that together. And they probably need to have some specialist expertise in those areas in climate technology to be able to collate useful data for the end customers. And so they have a product which enables them to compile those reports. However, they are dependent on a third-party service because it's a small business. They're using a mail delivery system. So in this case, that's the channel between them and their subscribers. And so they're kind of limited by what product metrics they can actually measure. But let's take a look. So they're at a business level, they care about their margin and they care about acquiring customers. Obviously, their cost is the human experts that are compiling it, and that cost gets spread out if they have more subscribers. So customer acquisition is very important. So the things that they can measure from this mail delivery system is adoption, renewals. So that will help them to indicate whether they are acquiring customers and maintaining a healthy margin. They can also measure engagement. Maybe that's useful. That will tell them things like, are people reading the reports fully? Are people clicking on the links perhaps? And expansion, that might be something related to reaching new customers in new areas. You can also see at the business level, something that's important to them is the percentage of successful big bets, which is interesting. That means it's important to them to be experimenting. On the process and tech level, they're measuring velocity and volatility. So this tells me that what's important to them is that they are delivering new things at a sustainable pace and consistently delivering things. That will tell me whether, and that I think is a good indicator of whether they'll be able to sustain and maintain those levels of adoption and renewals. And obviously, team churn is important to them as well, because they're dependent on expertise, human expertise. Again, this is just one example given to me by one product manager. So there might be other things that they're measuring, and there might be things missing here as well. But hopefully you can start to see that it's useful to think about how these metrics relate to each other. The next example is a larger company, a late growth stage company. It's Carousell, which is a Singapore company. It's a marketplace that sells new and used goods between consumers and between businesses and consumers. I think they've had 14 or so funding rounds, so already quite mature. Just a few metrics shared with me. Gross merchandise value, that is the transactions multiplied by the order value. So you can see within the product, measuring the daily transaction volume is one part of that equation. So we can clearly relate those two. They're obviously, they care about customer acquisition as well. So they will be measuring things like adoption and activation within the product. And interestingly, they are also measuring the number of experiments ran per team per quarter as well. So they want their teams to be experimental and innovative, which I thought was quite interesting. And maybe you can also just think about what else, given that there's things missing here, what else could be interesting for Carousell to be measuring? All right, so I'll move on to the final example. This is one that should be familiar to everybody. It's Microsoft 365, which represents about 30 to 40% of Microsoft's entire revenue. They have about 220,000 employees in Microsoft, so probably a large portion of them working on this enormous suite of products. Obviously, there are many, many more things being measured around Microsoft 365 than you see here. You can see also some interesting things. There are more high-level things that are maybe tangential to software delivery at the business level, like marketing campaign ROI, which we as the product owners say for one of those products might not necessarily be able to influence directly. And obviously, all of these metrics come across a wide range of products and teams. So maybe one thing that we would want to think about if we were some kind of portfolio manager here is to think about how can we measure things consistently across that portfolio? What are the most important things for us to measure for all of the products and teams? So this could serve as a guide for those teams. But we should still be able to reason about the relationships and discard things that might not make sense. So if we just focus in a little bit on some of them, let's focus on one business metric, monthly recurring revenue. And we can clearly see the relationships and inferences between average revenue per user, product adoption, and conversion rates, and how those are likely to impact monthly recurring revenue. We can also infer that if we are measuring the volume of defects and the performance of the products and infrastructure, then those things will likely impact the conversion rates and the adoption and revenue per user. And you can also see at the team level, there are many, many things. Obviously, it's a mature organization. A lot of the people working on those products will have a lot of context, and the organization cares about maintaining employee satisfaction, reducing turnover rates, ensuring participation in well-being programs and things like that. So there's many more things you can see the more mature and larger organization might be measuring. So there are just a few examples, some good, some bad. They all get us thinking about whether the metrics make sense and make sense right now. So I hope this talk got you excited to try out this tool on your own teams. The Value Delivery Metrics Loop Canvas was created together with my colleagues, Justin, Ali, and Wal. We collaborated to arrive at this iteration, and we want to be able to share it with the community. So you can download it from the website. We have both versions, with and without the time horizons. And we're releasing it under the Creative Commons attribute and share alike license, which means that you can use it for commercial purposes, you can make changes, but you have to give us the attribution and you have to release your own iterations under the same license. So we'd love for you to go out and try using it with your teams. And do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can send me a message with your feedback or questions or anything there as well. Just a last shout out to Josh Seiden and the icon designers at the Noun project for some of the content that I used in this presentation. And lastly, give me feedback, please. Everyone, get out your phones and scan this QR code because that's my measure of success.